Information about the world of running, inspiration to fuel passion and excellence, and ideas for making connections and finding community. You're listening to A to Z Running. Welcome back to another episode of AtoZrunning Podcast. I'm Andy.
I'm Zach, and we've got our brownies. Andy, what kind of brownies are they today?
They are double chocolate brownies.
Double chocolate, which means they just put, more chocolate?
More chocolate.
Or two different kinds
In
of
fact,
chocolate.
I think that it made Miles a little wired because he came down here a couple times during our recording session.
We might be interrupted by a telltale small voice. So we got our brownies, we got our coffee, and hopefully Miles will actually stay in bed for the fourth time. And we are ready for a great show.
Yeah, so we're going to be talking about letting it go. We're going to be talking about sacrifice, the things we need to embrace, and how to balance life between those two.
But before we get to that, let's jump into some things from the world of running.
Let's get started with the world of running. This week, what do we have, Zach?
Well, we got a few big announcements. So the one everyone's talking about are the shoes. So World Athletics came out with their decision, and it was basically not a decision, which these things tend to be. They basically said, carry on, but don't do anything crazy. So the rule is whatever Nike did originally and everyone started to copy, that's okay. You can have a carbon fiber plate. You can have crazy foams from space, all these things. You can put moon rocks if you want to in there. So what you can't do is you can't have 17 carbon fiber plates like Kipchoge's shoe had. And there's a limit on the thickness of the foam. So it can't be like
40 millimeters.
Yeah, so what you can't do is you can't have stilts taking you, a foot into the
Bouncing.
sky. Right. So that makes sense. I think all of that's logical. What they essentially tried to do is honor the fact that all these companies had just poured so much stinking
Brooks
money.
just came out with theirs.
Yeah, so much stinking R&D time and money into creating their own shoe after Nike did its thing. And so now there's about 7 of them out there. I don't know, Brooks has got one. Asics is either in the making or they finished it, or maybe they haven't released it. Of course, Hoka's got theirs. Saucony's got theirs. So it's happening. It's happening everywhere. Pretty soon, every major brand will have one because it's legit. They can. And they need to now, because to be competitive with the shoe choices now, you need to have a shoe that is that shoe. I'm not sure. I've said this from the beginning. It is not a shoe that's good for everyone to wear.
And he's saying that because he has personal experience that would say that maybe he should do something different.
That being the case, there's a very real chance that some of us should simply not wear the shoe because it's going to cause more problem than good, and others it's going to be a significant benefit and you should definitely wear it. There's no doubt that it is a benefit for the vast majority of us. So yeah, and what's really going to happen here at this point is if the rule is held strictly, you never know with these things, because there used to be a rule, by the way, about how you could or couldn't have technology that enhanced performance, but it was way too vague, so they didn't enforce it. But if they hold the rule strictly, then in a very short amount of time, every major company will have the shoe, so everyone will be able to wear it, and it's just going to move us back to the same level playing field. Now, the thing that bothers me about the conversation is like the tag name people give the Nike shoe, the cheater flies, or that kind of thing. It makes no sense to call people cheaters for wearing those shoes, whether before everyone else had access or not, because that's like saying because Nike made this cool singlet that is a little bit more, less friction, that you're a cheater if you wear that cool singlet that Nike gave you. That makes no sense. However, now that it's legitimate a rule, it is no longer, it doesn't matter. It's no longer relevant. The point here is if the shoe helps you, wear it. Because if you have access to it, and everyone will soon, why not?
I do now, yeah.
Yep, why not? So if the shoe doesn't help you, don't wear it. That's the same rule with every shoe out there. So that's my take on it. And I know that there's constant conversation circling around this, and it just, until someone comes out there and says, okay, we're going to officially ban all technological advancements and you have to wear flip-flop sandals while you run, until that happens, we're just going to continue to have the conversation. It's going to continue to happen.
Mm-hmm.
moving on, there's a half marathon in Japan, and the Marugame half marathon that saw some crazy results this weekend. And I was really excited when I saw this, because essentially what we had were 6 different national record performances in one race, 3 men and 3 women.
So impressive.
Yeah. And these were just like kind of obscure national records too, like records that have been around for a long time and people showed up and just raced big. 2 Japanese men both broke the Japanese half marathon record.
And I bet theirs was really good too.
Was.
They are very
so
strong.
they're running 60 minutes plus a few seconds, which is just amazing. So the big one was the winner of the race was, for the men's race, was Australian Brett Robinson, breaking the Australian half marathon record in a sub 1 hour performance for 59:57:56, which is just huge. The unfortunate one was second place was one of the Japanese finishers, Yusuke Ogura, and he ran 60 minutes flat.
So he almost broke that barrier.
And we should at some point have Dathan tell you what that feels like, because he's done it too. 60 flat, man. And so then, you've got some national records there for both of them. And then 4th place in the race was another Japanese man running under the previous national record. He was only 6 seconds behind his countryman, which is crazy. And then on the women's side, you had 3 national records. Namibia, national record broken, South Korea, national record broken, and Canada's national record broken.
What was that time? Do you have it in front of you?
Yeah. Let me look at it. Let's see. Okay, this was Andrea Sekafian.
Andrea, good name.
And she ran 109.38 for 6th place in the race. And I'm looking at the top 10 results, but I think there were others too, some further back ones. I think someone mentioned the Mongolian half marathon record, or no, the Mongolian marathon record was very nearly broken, which is an interesting, I wouldn't have paid a lot of attention to that without seeing that. I'm just not very familiar with Mongolian records.
So it was a good day. It was a good day for running.
It's good, exciting stuff. It's always cool to see races like that. So one more for you, Andy.
Okay.
World Athletics announced with the World Indoor Track and Field Championships originally scheduled for a couple of weeks from now in China. And with the virus and everything going on there were some concerns, naturally. And so they announced an indefinite postponement, potentially cancellation, and then came back just recently with a rescheduling. So they are intending to still hold the World Indoor Track and Field Championships in China in the late March now instead of February. And what that means is not a lot necessarily. It's just a quick shift. A couple of weeks doesn't make a big difference for most athletes. However, the U.S. had announced that you could no longer qualify for the World Championships at the U.S. Championships because of this change. They weren't sure if it was going to be scheduled in an appropriate window of time. And I don't really know what the motivation behind that announcement was at the time. But I haven't been able to find if they've rescheduled the qualification opportunity or if they're going to allow it to still happen now at U.S. Championships. I don't actually know. So I've been looking for that. If you find it and you're listening to this, post in the comments or hit us on social media. We really are intrigued to find out what they've decided for USATF on that. So the U.S. Championships, by the way, are still on for next weekend on Valentine's Day and the Saturday that follows it.
For the love of track.
For the love of track. Everybody now. So that's going to be an exciting time. We've been seeing a lot of pros show up and race some big times just in the last week even. And so there's, clearly some of them are intending to go out there and run well. And so that's always exciting for us. We love track, so we'll follow that one as well. Talking today about sacrifice and trying to frame the topic in a helpful way, but understanding that in so many ways to pursue an interest or a passion must involve sacrifice. And the simple concept here is, I think it's Michael Bungay Stanier who wrote a book about coaching, not coaching athletics, but like coaching professionally. Like employer-employee kind of thing. So he wrote about the point of if you say yes to anything, then you must be saying no to something. Because anytime I'm choosing to do something, I'm sacrificing that time that might have been devoted to another thing. So the principle is every choice we make is a sacrifice in some sense. And in running, there's certainly a lot of truth to that in a lot of ways. So we wanted to dig into it to get at some of the depth, to get at some of the interesting dynamics that surround it, and to try to make it practical.
Yeah, we titled it Let It Go because there are things that we just kind of need to let go of when it comes to our lives that, we've talked before about like cutting down on some of our distractions. And I do think that embracing the things that matter and knowing the things that truly are important to us can help us let go of those things that take us away from our goals.
Yeah, priority is a huge piece of this conversation.
Found this great quote. There's a series out there called the Divergent series. Some of you may have seen it. Sci-fi. Zach loves sci-fi.
You just said seen it, and I'm sitting here thinking it's books. No, yeah, they made movies, didn't they? Yeah, because that happens.
It happens. I really like this quote from Veronica Roth, the author of this trilogy. There are so many ways to be brave in this world. Sometimes bravery involves laying down your life for something bigger than yourself or someone else. Sometimes it involves giving up everything you've ever known or everyone you've ever loved for the sake of something greater. But sometimes it doesn't. Sometimes it is nothing more than gritting your teeth through pain and the work of every day, the slow walk toward a better life. That is the sort of bravery I must have now.
So is that going to be your mantra for the trials?
Yeah. I do think that it requires a lot of bravery and it requires a lot of grit. And I think a lot of running is working through the pain and doing the everyday work. And it doesn't seem grand at times, lacing up the shoes and not feeling so great, maybe even on a 4-mile run. But every day that works towards better health, mentally, physically, emotionally, just for that day. So there's rewards even of that day. But then also if you're looking to try to achieve a time goal or try to get to a certain race, or maybe it's because you're pursuing raising money for something you care about.
And that work of every day is probably one of the key dynamics. We're going to come back to that. So to get into our thinking with sacrifices, the first thing we wanted to do is share just a couple of examples of sacrifices we do or don't make or have or haven't made and why. So Andy, start us off. What's a sacrifice that you have had to make but you don't like making?
There's some sacrifices that Zach and I have resisted for a while, making for running and making for our health. And for me, one of the major ones was dairy. And I know that sounds silly, but I really enjoy cheese. I really enjoy ice cream. So giving those up because they were causing me serious digestive issues was a sacrifice I needed to make.
Yeah, that's true. So, and that's probably one in a list of a number of foods that you've, over the years. What is it? You gave up peanut butter for a while, right?
I did.
It was causing you some problems. So years of not eating peanut butter.
Now I eat it daily again. So I don't know what the issue
was.
Hourly. When you're marathon training, nut butter is your friend. Any kind of nut butter.
So that's a good example. I think for me, one of the sacrifices that I don't like and I would not make if I weren't training consistently over time is sleep. I don't like having to get a lot of sleep or a decent amount of sleep, especially like I can think back to periods of time where I wasn't training as much. I think I can go on 5 or 6 hours of sleep a night for quite a while without noticing negative side effects until I'm training, and then it's a problem. And the reason why is because I find myself to be the most productive in many ways, depending on the kind of work I'm doing, late at night. That's when like my creative engine starts to fire, and I like to write things, and I write best late at night. And
we do our podcast late at night.
We do a lot of this work late at night. So certainly I don't like having to get lots of sleep. All right, how about sacrifices that you didn't make and probably should have, Andy?
This one was kind of a hard one for me to think about, but there is a thing, and it still is a thing for me, and that's racing hard all the time. I raced hard in college every single meet and every single workout. If I didn't understand what a workout was supposed to be, I would just go as hard as I possibly could until I was like laying on the ground or vomiting, or I was that girl. Like, yeah. You'd find me by the trash cans. So yeah, I wouldn't sacrifice for the long-term goals. I didn't actually know that I was supposed to. So that's something that now it's ingrained in me. Like, you're supposed to be at the end of yourself every single race, but that's not true, especially if it's towards a main goal. If I'm looking at having a peak race And racing so hard multiple times leading up to it can change my training. It can cause injury if I'm not quite prepared for a shorter distance when I'm training for a longer distance. So there are a lot of reasons that sacrifice is important. And frankly, I spent many years just ignoring that and doing what I wanted.
A sacrifice that I don't make and probably should, that I haven't made and probably should have, but I'm just not willing to, is diet and food, nutrition. I'm just really not willing to be very regimented or strict with my diet. And in large part because I just like to eat things that are not always healthy. And I don't necessarily do so in extremes, although on occasion I'll eat half a pan of brownies while we're recording a podcast episode.
That is true. He's already had 2 generous size
I have not eaten both of them yet.
Oh, okay.
So, I don't eat well in terms of that kind of a thing. And I know there's a potential gain from being a little bit stricter with my diet, but I'm not really interested in gaining that in that way. So I don't. Last question. Sacrifices that paid off, Andy. What's a sacrifice you've made or you make that is worth it?
So I am a runner because I love to run, and the passion of running is what drives me, and I really enjoy going out and just doing whatever I want on a day. And something that I have sacrificed for training that I've seen gains on is that I've given up that like flexibility, spur of the moment, spontaneous 15-miler, or going on an adventure run.
The free spirit runner.
The free spirit runner, which I love. And I will do that after my marathon cycle is done when I don't have a goal race right away. But yeah, I love that. And I have given it up for the sake of training, and I've seen big rewards. Like, I haven't really had structured training until Zach put together a training program for me for Chicago. And during that time, I ran a massive 5K PR, and, obviously my trials, I qualified. So my big goal, I achieved it. So I really do think that paid off for me to include structure and let go of that spontaneous running free through the woods.
It just sounds so unappealing to me.
Really? See, I love it. I love it.
I need the plan. So for me, a sacrifice that paid off is in the past, especially college and the few years following college, I really had the all-in mindset with running. And we've referenced Steve Magnus and Brad Stolberg's Passion Paradox book, and they talk about this, that to really pursue a passion to the highest possible degree, you have to kind of have this all-in mindset. And it's not always healthy. It's not always a good thing. So college tends to be a time when it actually can be a good thing, potentially, because for many of us during college, we have very few responsibilities, very few things that we have to prioritize much. And so for me in college, it was certainly possible to be more all in. And then when Andy and I were first married, and it was just the two of us, we didn't have kids yet, and we were working, but we were kind of finding a routine and a schedule. There was a lot more space and opportunity to really commit to the sport in that time too. So what I found is I learned a lot during that period of time and grew in my understanding of running and the sport of running, and as well all of the things that contribute to it. And I think consequently I was able to establish a lot of good habits and routines that I've just kind of carried since then, simply because they have been habit.
So this is kind of a sidetrack thing, Zach.
Oh,
but
boy.
I was thinking about during that time, and there were things that maybe you sacrificed during that time because of your headlong drive into the discovery of the sport. And that would be friendships and like relationships, because
the social scene.
the social element, because it was easier for you because you're an introvert. You've said that before. I can say that on this podcast.
I don't know what you're talking about.
So that might have been a sacrifice that he made that he didn't even realize he was making, that was probably not the healthiest choice at that time, because then you've started integrating more side-by-side time, running with other people, added the community factor in the past few years, and that's brought you a lot more balance.
Yeah, potentially some ins and outs over the years with that. We'll come back to that because that's going to be a big piece of something we're going to bring up right near the end here. So we're going to try to tackle the topic from essentially two sides, when to sacrifice for training and when to sacrifice training for life or other priorities.
Now, this is coming from our perspectives, and everyone is different. And so when we share this with you, we're not saying like you should, you can't, you must. These are just from our experiences and from those around us that we've learned from. So we're trying to bring together our most authentic reflections for you. And
Andy's saying that because she wants to temper my absolutism that's going to come out here soon, where I'm going to start telling you have to live your life a certain way. So when to sacrifice for training, there's a lot of things that just as runners, we're automatically going to be sacrificing without even always making a conscious choice. And there's other things that most of us probably do sacrifice just because we have to if we're pursuing a goal in running. I mentioned that every yes is a no to something, that concept. And so in running, every day that I decide to go out and train, I'm saying no to something else with that time. And for most of us, if we've got families, if we've got homes and such, there's a lot of things that could occupy that time that we end up having to say no to. And Andy's got a decent list of some of those, like with our home and home improvement. And
yeah, we haven't painted our house since we purchased it. And
why would we? Your parents painted it before.
It's been over a decade. So there are things that we just haven't done. One of them is that we would probably want to paint ourselves, and we just don't have the energy for it.
I don't like having paint on myself. If you want to paint yourself, you can go ahead and do that, but I don't want to paint myself.
Oh, goodness. And then other things like our home is not perfect all the time. Like we have running group at our house, and like I clean up as best I can, but it's not perfect. And the ladies I'm with have a lot of grace for that. And I have to kind of that's something I have to let go, like let go my need for perfection.
And it's a harder thing for Andy to let go than her husband. Because so
he's talking about himself. In case some of you are just joining us, we're married.
And I'll mention priorities, right? You always, as you grow up, you kind of inherit some of your priorities from your parents. And I always remember my mom kind of jokes about this quite a bit. She had something in our kitchen. It was like a sign or a plaque on the wall in the kitchen that said, an immaculate house is the sign of a misspent life. And I have never forgotten that. I don't know when exactly the last time I saw it was, but I can see it in my eyes still now in my mind. So that's carried with me in the sense of like, is it really that important that the house is pristine or clean when company's coming over, or should I do a core circuit instead? Yeah,
I have differing opinions because I want people to feel comfortable in my home. But I do feel like there are some things that we've kind of just like, it's okay. Like, we're still going to live life, and we're still going to live life with others and let go of the need for appearance of being perfect.
So that said, one of the other common sacrifices is something on the social side of things, which is most of us runners have to do a lot of our training in early mornings, or even if we don't have to do it in the early morning, we certainly have to be well rested for our training day to day. And so then it has a lot to do with what are we doing on the weekends and evenings. And most of us don't do a lot on the weekends and evenings. I say most of us. I mean, it just kind of depends. If you've got a family, obviously it changes that kind of a thing. But, even as I talk to a lot of my friends out there who are still single or who are, younger and kind of entering the post-college world. And, we just tend to form these habits around what makes our training work best. And many of us find that if I go to bed at the same time every night and keep that consistency, I feel better when I run. So I do it.
Yeah. So we don't stay up too late at night, and especially before long runs, at least for me. The other thing is like fashion and heels, and sometimes certain clothing isn't as mobile as other types of clothing. And if we're in like full on marathon training cycle, we want to be able to like stretch anytime we need to stretch. And if you're someone who wears skirts or dresses, that is very difficult to do. So some of us have sacrificed like fashion on a day-to-day basis for our running and for mobility sake. So, and another thing too is also on a daily basis, I'm not like making my hair up perfect and my face up perfect because
you're
I'm
not? Man.
Oh goodness.
All this time, I thought you spent an hour every day getting your hair to look like that. So good.
That ponytail. It's really something. But yeah, so I guess like I'm kind of sacrificing that time. I just honestly like especially if we're working out more than once a day, we really do kind of minimal makeup, minimal hairstyling. I'm not saying that you creatives out there, you people like those of you who are really into fashion, I'm not saying you have to give that up. I'm just saying personally that's something that I have sacrificed. And also I should mention too, for transparency's sake, I do for work. I'm in the kind of like in the entertainment industry, so I do have to wear a dress and heels when I do shows. So
Which often causes concern because those heels are just destructive on your muscles.
No, I wouldn't choose it for myself, but I love my job, so I'm willing to make that sacrifice. Now,
one that's very important, and we all handle it in various different kinds of ways, but is necessary, is how we're spending our money. Especially because if we're needing to travel for big races or even just having the equipment, running is not a high capacity equipment kind of sport, but you have certainly a couple of pair of shoes and some decent running clothes and can get expensive fast. Yeah, it absolutely can. And if you're like us and you really like running clothes, then you'd end up finding yourself willing to spend more money on things like that, and in many ways less money on other, I don't buy other kinds of clothes as nearly as much because I would just much rather wear my running clothes any casual time anyway. So there's certainly that. But if you're traveling for races as well, that might take like vacation time that you may have with work. So a lot of us start creating our vacations around our racing schedule and trying
which
to actually,
we love. Yeah.
It's a great way to do it. Anytime we vacation, we often look for races, even if it wasn't the plan originally. And we're going to be in the spot and we're going to enjoy whatever we're doing. But if we can find a 5K nearby, maybe we'll jump in.
Yeah, it's fun for us. So yeah, we spend more of our money on running than I think maybe most people do. So there are times when more sacrifice is acceptable than other times, right, Zach?
Yeah, so when we think about like prioritizing sacrificing running or sacrificing life for running, I think there are times when the priorities demand that we set aside the training a bit, but there are other times when it's probably more okay to be just a bit more laser focused on training and kind of cut out more of the rest of life. That's the idea that we're going at here. And the one that I want to just bring up, because this always comes to mind, is especially like high school, college, especially college, even as a collegiate runners, it's not only is it more acceptable, if you're a collegiate runner, especially if you're a scholarship athlete, it's kind of like your job. In a sense.
It is your job.
Because they really, they're essentially paying you to run.
That's what my dad always told me, in fact. He said, just think about it. When you show up to run every day, that's your job. Yeah.
And in some ways, that job is then also then paying for your schooling. And so when you look at it that way, it's, the student athlete piece, like those two things are going hand in hand, and it is a clear priority. So for collegiate athletes, I often encourage a greater degree of sacrifice for them so that they can achieve, you never want that regret. There's that one piece there. You never want that regret. For most, when they're done with college sports, they're not likely to continue competing at that level anymore for most. So you want to really pursue it during that time. Give it due diligence. And so a higher degree of sacrifice makes sense. I'm really not going to spend a lot of time on the social scene in my college when I'm engaged in season in a sport. It's just hard to manage that, and it's probably not a wise choice anyways. So that makes sense.
Race week. I mean, that's a time where you really want to focus in, and if somebody is asking you to go to a concert race week or maybe even go to dinner and it's going to interfere with your preparations, that would be a good time to say no.
Yeah, and so what this really speaks to is the importance of the right balance of kind of finding that harmony in when we're making sacrifices and when we're not. And so a good example with that is like during the holiday season. A lot of times the holiday season is a really hard time to train well. And in some instances, that's necessary. When family's in from out of town, when there are big events going on with, the groups of people I don't necessarily normally see, it's important to make that a priority. But then, if I'm spending 3 days in a row with my parents, and the fourth day they say, hey, let's grab some brunch, just kind of ad hoc. It wasn't part of the holiday plans, but let's grab some brunch. I might say, we spent 3 days together and I need to get my long run in. So, this time I'm going to have to say no. And that's an appropriate amount of balance then in an instance like that, because you're not sacrificing the relationship, because the relationship clearly is well fostered. So there's a dynamic there. And the race week concept can feed that in a sense, because it's like, for this week, I may have to cut out more of life. And I'm not doing it to say, someone says, hey, let's get some dinner. And I'm not saying, nope, not going to do it. Instead, what I'm saying is, well, I've got some things I need to be getting to, or some extra rest, or whatever that is. Can we do next week after the race? And that, of course, that's an acceptable thing to do. And those are instances where I might take an extra day off of work. And I might, if depending on the kind of job I have, I might try to scale back some of the physically demanding things I might have to do for my job. And those are all acceptable things if it's an understanding that's established. I'm not going to just make those decisions in isolation because they involve other people. But however, on the other side of it, and the second part of all of this, is when you need to sacrifice training for life or for other priorities, or when many of us choose to, depending on, obviously what's going on in your life.
Yeah, and I think there are some out that can relate, but pregnancy was one of those times for me. And I had this vision of a fit pregnancy. I saw all these magazines.
Alicia Montano run an 800-meter race at 8 months pregnant.
And it was beautiful and wonderful, and she looked fabulous. But unfortunately, in my situation, I had both of my pregnancies were dangerous. I wasn't able to have that dream fit pregnancy. So I had to give up that dream, and I could have pushed through, I guess. I had some Braxton Hicks, and I won't get into the whole story, but I had to stop running at about 20 weeks for both. And that was a time where I felt like, I am carrying a child, and that is a big job. So I'm not going to be running during this season.
Yeah, and there were other concerns and complications with the pregnancies. And
running through your pregnancy is safe, but for me it was not. So it's a very personal thing, and the priority is the baby at that point.
It's a hard thing to have to make a choice like that at times when you don't necessarily know if you have to make that choice. That's kind of what makes it, especially earlier on when you weren't really sure if it was a bad or good thing, or so you
talk
have
to
doctor
make the choice. Then. Talk to a doctor.
But if you can't get the information, if you just can't know whether it's a necessary choice, then you have to choose with just your understanding of what you are comfortable with.
Yeah.
And what it came down to for us, and certainly for Andy in that moment, was there's no risk that's worth it when I'm talking about my child's life here.
Yeah.
So it
and I was able to walk, and I did a lot of activity, but the running wasn't safe.
So one of the elements that's present in everything we've been talking about so far are relationships. And I think the filter that I tend to use when I try to broach this topic, like when must I sacrifice my training for relationships, and when is it okay to sacrifice relationships for training? Naturally, as we've been talking about, I seem to be more inclined to sacrifice relationships than other people.
Me.
I find it easy to justify it. Like, do you really need more than 2 friends? I don't think so. So, do we have 2 friends? I think we can come up with 2. So here's the filter that I use, though, and I wish I could say I do this with fidelity and effectively all the time, but I don't. But this is what I attempt to aspire toward, and that is you basically have kind of 2 circles of all relationships. You have the circle of influence, and these are the relationships that are close enough that my actions and interactions with this person are influential both ways. So they influence me, I influence them in a significant or deep capacity. That's, family, close friends, and sometimes other kinds of relationships too. But certainly that circle of influence, those are key and important relationships, and I cannot sacrifice them for my training. Because I'm cutting out something fundamentally essential, whether to myself and the other person or one or the other of us at a time. It just depends. But then beyond that, you have kind of like the rest of it, which is sometimes referred to as the circle of concern. By the way, I did not make up these concepts. So circle of influence, circle of concern. And the circle of concern is essentially anything that I might care about, but I don't have significant influence over it. It doesn't have significant influence over me. And really what that boils down to is it's okay to cut some of those things out, especially if it's just, for a time, especially that. We talked about like race week and such. It's easy to cut something like that out during that kind of a time. But even to say, for the next couple of years, I'm going to pursue this goal, I'm not going to go out with friends at this, weekend thing that we like to do. I'm just not going to do that for a couple of years.
Yeah, or for us, we do enjoy other kinds of sports like volleyball and soccer, which we haven't done for many years now.
I forgot we like to do that stuff.
I know. Yeah, so those are some things that we love, but we've given up for our running.
Yeah, just not important enough. But what else do we need to sacrifice training for, Andy?
Yeah, work at times. Unfortunately, we're not professional runners. It would be great if we were. So if anyone listening out there wants to sponsor us, I will be running unattached at the Olympic trials. We have to make money to live. So sometimes work demands, they get in the way of training, but they do take priority because that's how we feed ourselves. That's how we house ourselves.
Yeah, and so I'm going to give another kind of big picture concept here that I think has been really helpful in thinking about these things. The pastor at our church has kind of this concept of identities, hierarchy of identities, that's been really interesting to translate to this kind of a thing. And so he talks about essentially we have kind of 5 important identities, and they have an order to them, and they need to continue to stay in this order to have a balanced self, in a sense. And so the first one is my identity as a person. And, the pastor talks about this as we're children of God, our identity as a person comes from that. But it's what defines who I am, the answer to the question, who I am. The next one he calls priest, and I think he's referring to if we're Christians, then we're representing that. And so our identity involves how we represent that belief, that faith. The next one then is partner. So the third identity is my spouse. And clearly then, that being such an important thing, I cannot sacrifice my training. I cannot sacrifice my marriage for my training. I cannot do that. And so if there's a time where it's evident that my training is causing conflict in my marriage, and it's not something that, a lot of times it's something that if just better communication could resolve that, just better planning could resolve that, those
have
kinds
we
of
had
things.
Conflict about running, Zach?
Apparently we have
A lot.
This is why we can't run together, because it causes conflict in our marriage. And so
we do run together sometimes. He's kind of like dramatic about these things. But we have thought about the amount of time and effort that we put into it. Yeah. And especially at different seasons of life when things have been difficult, sometimes it's like, you need to give that up a little bit. Can you run 10 miles instead of 13? Because I want you to have dinner with us before you go to bed. So.
Yeah, or maybe the answer to that is, can you just be more diligent about planning your schedule better so you're not running when I need you to do this instead. Yeah.
Right. And I think that we have had a lot of discussions about this, as you can tell, and we've done much better with it. I am so hesitant to even say that out loud because I don't want to say that we've arrived by any means, because we're always on this journey of learning to love each other better. But I do have to say that communication, and then it's the expectation piece. I think I wanted Zach to come through for me, but I wasn't articulating those needs. So I think that the communication beyond the running communication into like, okay, what is it that I really am expecting from you? And I don't want to be let down, and neither do you. Like, it's unfair for me to have these unsaid expectations.
Yeah, I'm going to probably misquote this one. I think it's Emerson, whatever his name is, Emerson, who wrote Love and Respect. I think he's the one who said that or if not one of the greatest sources of conflict is unmet expectation.
Yep.
And that is so true for this.
We could be written as an example for that.
Yeah, he actually did.
We were in that book?
Yeah,
okay.
Yeah. So the fourth one is being a parent then. That's the fourth key identity that in the hierarchy. And so, I can't put my training above my kids. Can't do it. And I don't think that anyone out there listening to this is inclined to. I'm not going to guess that you would do that. But at the same time, a lot of times when I do that, it's by accident. I'm not being mindful when I make decisions about my training that are impacting my kids.
And that could be replaced with other things too. So if you're not a parent, it could be anybody who depends on you in their life as being their person.
Yeah.
Like your sister, if you're a sister or a brother, somebody who holds a lot of space for someone in your life.
And in many instances, if you're not a parent, you just skip that one too, because the hierarchy continues on and not necessarily, so if you're not a spouse, if you don't have a partner, then you skip that one too. But here's the interesting thing for me then. The fifth one on the list, and there's a reason for this, it's a very important reason, is your status, your identity as a professional, the work that you do. And that is a very nuanced concept because, let's say you don't have a full-time job. Then what does that mean, your identity as a professional? And some of us, our identity as a professional is being a parent, because that's my job in a sense. Some of us, our identity as a professional is caring for my grandparents. Maybe I'm a live-in caretaker for them while my spouse is working full-time elsewhere, that kind of thing. So you can define professional in a lot of different ways, but it gets at the spirit of we need to do something. We need to be productive and to work. That's a very important dynamic in our humanity, is to be working and working towards something. For some of us, training actually is that. And so this is where that interesting concept comes in. It can be that dynamic. And for others, it's not at all. And so then when I have the unbalance of putting my training ahead of the important work that I'm involved in, that creates, again, that out of sync priority too. Potentially, but there's some very interesting nuances there as well. And what it all boils down to here is when do I need to sacrifice training for life? I think when it falls into some of those key categories of high priority things, I should always sacrifice training for those things unless those things are already in harmony or in balance. And I mentioned that with the holidays thing previously. I don't have to spend time with the same family member 5 days in a row in the holidays if not run any of those 5 days. Potentially. Now, maybe you do with your situation. So the key here, and my big takeaway as I think through it, is I need to sacrifice training for life so that I can maintain the significant relationships, so that I can maintain the appropriate balance in my life priorities, and so that I can maintain my commitments in my life, whether that's to my job, to those people in my life. And Andy mentioned, if someone's depending on me to come through for them, I need to maintain those commitments, and training should not get in the way of any of that kind of stuff.
So letting go of some of those things in our lives that are hindering the things that we need to embrace. And I think that those are always life discussions and things that we can think through. We have time on runs to do that sometimes. So maybe on your next long run, kind of contemplate what it is that's important in your life and how running can even intersect some of those places in a better way. Like I talked about with community with Zach, and how he dove into training, which was a really good thing, but he sacrificed relationships for it. And now he's integrated them back in. Well, now we found harmony and balance, like Zach was talking about, in that element. So letting go of something doesn't always mean saying goodbye. Sometimes it means letting go of it, opening your hand to it, looking at it, and seeing how you can marry it with your goals and plans and visions. Thanks again for spending your time with AtoZrunning Podcast. If you are enjoying this podcast, please like and share, and maybe even leave some feedback for us.
And as you know, with the trials coming up, we've got some interesting content that we're going to be featuring and displaying around that time as well, and intending to spend some time at the trials grabbing some sound from some athletes who are living the dream possibly not living the dream quite as much post-race. We'll see how our legs feel.
At least to do podcasts, you don't need your legs. You can sit down for it, so that's good.
That's true. Even better if we could get our hands on some Normatec and have them be able to sit in some Normatec. Then we can get the good post-race feel. All right, so that's coming up. Stay tuned in the coming weeks.